Start, and then you can introduce the rest.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, my friend.
Good afternoon. We have an hour, and it's the first of, I think, 3 sessions that you have on cybersecurity. So I want to frame this hour by addressing first.
Close the light, just speak into the mic toward the wall. Speak loud.
You can't hear me? You can hear me. Fantastic. Thank you, Diane. I wanted to start by addressing the changing threat landscape, and then I will turn to my esteemed colleagues here to do the hard bit, which is to tell you what you should be doing about it. We want to try and keep this practical, and we want to try and keep this conversational as far as we can. If you do have questions, put up your hands and we will stop, we will answer those. But it's worth saying, as international legislators and parliamentarians, that I'm based here in London, working as the CISO for Credit Suisse. My colleagues here work for international companies. And what we are very cognizant of is the fact that our security depends not just on the security in the US and in the UK, but globally. And as a member of Credit Suisse, we have a large footprint in India. Like many global companies, it's like a back office for us. And if India's cybersecurity is not good, that impacts upon us very directly as well. So we're all in this together. I want to make 5 points. So for those of you who are taking notes on your phones, there are only 5 points that you need to take. The first point is that this is a threat that is growing. The reality is that the digitalization of our economy has a flip side, and that flip side is the downside cybersecurity threats. We collectively designed systems that were quick, they were efficient, and they were cheap, but they were not secure. And there are huge benefits to what we've done in the global economy with digitalization, but there is this flip side. And as we look forward, Lloyd's of London recently said the potential damage of a single global cyber attack could be between 83 and 193 billion. As a cost to the global economy. The overall cost could be 10 trillion by 2025. Almost half of the world's organizations likely to be impacted. So that's the first point. You can't ignore this. Point number 2, the bad guys, the adversaries, are growing. There are more of them. In terms of their technical capabilities, how good they are at this, governments are at the top end. And for the last decade, more than a decade, at conferences, cybersecurity conferences like these, we've spoken essentially about 4 nation states: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Most of the cybersecurity conferences I go to tend to be in the West, in the UK. That list might be longer if you were elsewhere in the world. But they have invested heavily in offensive cyber capabilities, and they have shown, all of them, that they are prepared to use those. The point I want to make, though, is that whilst those countries will continue to use those capabilities, the threshold for getting offensive cyber weapons is a pretty low one, and more countries, most of your governments will have these capabilities. Most of your governments will be prepared as part of their kind of conflict plans to use them as part of their armory. So if you look at, for example, the papers that have been published about NSO, the Israeli offensive cyber company that's been really pretty successful, Amnesty International lists a number of countries, many of them are named here, that were clients of NSO. So we have to be very, very clear that state threat is growing. If you work in the private sector, you're probably more focused on the criminal cyber threat. Most of these that we worry about operate out of Russia. The numbers of people who are sort of serious, very well qualified, technical kind of cyber criminals, it's probably not more than 100, a couple of hundred, but they operate with license out of Russia, knowing that essentially the Russian government, that President Putin, who has said so in terms, really doesn't mind, and indeed at times would encourage their attacks, their criminal attacks outside of Russia. That criminal ecosystem is fueled by a few things. The dark web enables all of these criminal organizations to talk to each other and to become a mini industry. It's very commoditized. They're really professional. They have help desks. They work together. They can communicate. The use of cryptocurrencies means that they can be paid, and they will, whilst if we put a lot of effort into it, we can trace that money back. It takes a lot of effort, and they know that for the most part that won't happen. They know that for the most part they will not be extradited from Russia to the US, even if the FBI have put them on a wanted list. The insurance industry is also continuing to pay out if there's a ransomware attack in most jurisdictions. Last speaker was from France. In France, some of the insurance companies have said we're no longer going to do this because it fuels an R&D budget for these criminal organizations. They're getting better and better. The good news is that they operate like a criminal business. What that means is that if you are better protected, better defended as a country or as an enterprise than your neighbors, they're probably going to go for the neighbors. About 44% of current ransomware attacks happen against government municipalities because they're underfunded, they're not well defended, and the big banks tend to actually be quite difficult targets. So these businesses will go where the kind of effort versus profit points them, and that tends to be towards the less well-defended enterprises. Insider threat is an increasing part of what we have to face, the people working within our organizations. The social tensions that we've seen, I think, increasingly means that people don't feel the same sense of loyalty. We're in a difficult economic global climate. It means that people are maybe more liable both to some kind of extortion, some kind of deal when they're approached from outside. And we've seen that from governments, and we've seen that from criminal organizations. There's a potential in the future. We talk about kind of cyber terrorism as something that might happen. Hasn't really happened yet, but I certainly will expect there to be more kind of hacktivism, which is to say political activists who express their dissatisfaction and their perspective by conducting cyber attacks rather than gluing themselves to a motorway or to a train and blocking something physically. So from that perspective, on almost every front, the threat actors, there are more of them, and they're getting better, they're getting faster, and the capabilities are getting better. Third point, their objectives haven't really changed for the last decade. For the criminal groups, and actually also for the North Korean government, this is about financial gain. They will go where the money is, and that's why we've seen such an epidemic of ransomware, where the victim is given a choice between paying a ransom, which of course funds the criminal enterprise, or seeing their data released onto the internet or onto the dark web to be exploited by other people, or their machinery, their network not being able to function. Secondly, we've seen increasing cyber attacks which are motivated by espionage. Now, in some cases, it's the classic spy versus spy, penetrating your governments to find out what you really think about a particular topic. But quite often now, it's also about intellectual property theft. We know, because they've said it, that the Chinese government have launched over a long period of time a significant security effort to enhance their economy by stealing secrets and basically replicating them, duplicating them. Thirdly, there are disruptive capabilities. It's what we've seen with Russia-Ukraine in terms of the Russians they started to do it some years ago, at the power system in Ukraine and having the ability. So Charlie Parton, with whom I used to work, was talking about the potential future if some of the things which are built into our increasingly digitally dependent economy are built from Chinese components. the ability to switch off not just military communications and battlefield communications, but whole economies, whole critical national infrastructure is part of the armory here. And then finally, I mean, worth mentioning, of course, the Russian influence operations. I think they were most effective in 2016 in the US when nobody was really expecting it. What we've seen since then is that we've all become more aware of fake news, of disinformation, and so it is less effective. So that's point 3. The things, the motivations and the purposes here haven't really changed. They're quite straightforward. Point 4, similarly, the methodologies that all of these groups use haven't really changed that much at a higher level, certainly. Yes, they are agile. Yes, they can be innovative. But essentially what they want to do is to gain access to your system. Now, one way they can do that is finding a backdoor or vulnerability in your system, like an unlocked window. But actually and they can also maybe guess your username. They can guess your password. But what we see more and more is that they harvest credentials. They will steal a username from your loyalty card, from your airline, from your supermarket, and they'll see whether, as you log into your Parliamentary account, into your bank account, you happen to use the same username. You use the same password, and if you do, all of a sudden that's unlocked. So there's a whole business that basically relies on recycling the passwords that you use in one account, but you also use it in a more sensitive account. They may also use a phishing email where they send you an email, it looks real. Artificial intelligence has meant that they can make it really very, very difficult to detect. But if you click on the link, or if you click on the attachment, then all of a sudden they have a way into your account, and they can use that both to steal whatever is in your account, but also to move sideways into other more sensitive accounts that eventually may give them control of your whole network. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about supply chain in the last hour. Another way that supply chain, it's been mainly talk about reliance and about dependencies, but the other vulnerability that we might have from our suppliers and our vendors is that if they get compromised, they've probably got a direct route into our systems. And so we see that more and more. The easier target being hacked into, and then using that to get to the more difficult targets like a global bank. Final point. So this threat is not one that we're going to eliminate. It would be nice to think that some of these governments that act as a kind of safe haven for some of these criminal groups that have these motivations will sort of change their spots, but it seems pretty unlikely. So what we need to now do, and I think what we're now going to address, is what actions can we take, not to eliminate the threat, because you will not do that. It's just too expensive, it's not a kind of sound investment, but to bring it within an acceptable risk appetite. And I will certainly argue that what we need to do is something, we know what good looks like. We can take lessons from Ukraine, we can take lessons from best practice, the financial system, and there is a playbook that tells you what you need to do. But you need to do it, and doing it is not easy. It's quite straightforward for your cybersecurity, your chief information security officers, people like Simon and myself to come in and say, you need to take backups, you need to have two-factor authentication, you need to patch your systems and eliminate those vulnerabilities. The reality in any complex organization, the reality in any government is that doing that is really, really difficult. An illustration of how the scale and complexity, it's my final point, have made that more difficult. So in 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. The navigation system for Apollo 11 had 12,300 transistors, and it had 145,000 lines of code to get Apollo 11 to the moon. If you look now at the iPhone 14 that I'm sure many of you have got in your pockets that came out last year, it's got 16 billion transistors in that phone. In any car now, you've probably got about 200 million lines of code. Now, all of that represents a potential vulnerability, the complexity there. It's harder and harder to fix it. So last year we had, I think Microsoft announced 12,000 patches just on their system. I think there are about 26,000 new vulnerabilities that came out. It would be a full-time job for all of us to sort all of that out. It's about being realistic that you can't eliminate it, but if you can do the basics, you're probably going to be fine. So I've set out the problem, but what are those basics? Simon, you can come up here or you can sit down there. But maybe, Simon, you can now talk us through what you think everybody in this room should be doing.